Hi, my name is Lauren Gawne, and today I'll be talking about the archiving process for the MH1 collection, which I'll be explaining what that collection is. It is part of PARADISEC's ever-increasing collection of digitized materials, and it's been my pleasure to be able to share those materials with the PARADISEC archive, and I'll be sharing the story behind them today. The slides for this talk are available at that short link there, and I'll try and make sure to post that in the conference chat as well while we're discussing today. So this talk is really a brief introduction so we can chat in a bit more detail about anything that interests you about the Shuba language, which the MH1 collection is for, how this collection was digitized, how it relates to other digital collections of materials in Shuba and related languages, and then briefly some lessons learnt from the archiving of these materials. Shuba is a Tibetic language from the larger Tibeto-Burman family. It is spoken by around 1,500 people. It is the red dot on this map of Nepal, and it is closely related to the dark grey dots that you see, along with a number of other languages that run across the Tibeto-Burman, across the Himalayan area at the top of Nepal there. So it's most closely related to Lamjung and Ilam Yolmo, but also very closely related to Malamchi Valley Yolmo as well. It is a language with very active transmission across all generations still, and you'll hear a bit more about the language as we go. The MH1 collection is a collection of materials recorded by Monica Hoylig, mostly in the early 1970s. It consists of, or consisted of, before it was digitized, reel-to-reel and cassette audio, a Super 8 film, which was edited from a larger collection of Super 8 film that no longer exists, as well as physical photographs and some printed documents. They're the earliest known existent recordings of the Shuba language. The only earlier documentation is in the Linguistic Survey of India. There's a very brief description and a translation of the prodigal son in those materials, thanks to a quirk of history where a group of Shuba laborers were working in India while the Linguistic Survey of India was happening. One thing that's been very exciting for me about working with this collection is that it is the basis of some of the analysis that Monica Hoylig published, along with her colleague Anna-Maria Harry. Anna-Maria Harry subsequently spent a couple of decades working with the larger Malamchi Valley Yolmo community, which is 10 to 20,000 speakers, and the area from which the Shuba speakers migrated a couple of centuries ago, where before doing that work, Anna-Maria Harry worked with Monica Hoylig for a number of years on Shuba. They were both part of the initial group of SIL linguists to come to Nepal in the late 60s and early 70s. And when they had to leave the country, both of them moved on to working with other communities. Monica Hoylig moved to working with Adiga speakers in the Russian Caucasus. So the materials that they collected in the 1970s represent a specific period of time in the documentation of Shuba. In 2017, I visited Monica in Berlin, having been in touch for a number of years talking about Shuba and its documentation. I've been working with Shuba speakers since 2009 on documentation work. They spoke very fondly of their time working with Monica. It was amazing to spend that time with her. A lot of the time I spent while I was in Berlin was mostly looking at the physical collection that had to be digitized, gathering metadata, assessing whether it was appropriate to archive a lot of these materials, and then compiling the metadata so that the materials, once digitized, could be archived with PARADISEC. For well over 90% of the materials. This is the first time they were made digital as part of this process, which was very exciting. It was also exciting to revisit some digitization that had happened in the early 2000s. As a brief illustration here of some of the photographs that had been digitized, you can see in that top digitization versus the bottom one, at the macro level, they both look okay, but if you zoom in on a particular area, you can see how it's a very, there's a lot of digital artifacting in that digitization. And so even materials that had been digitized before went through a redigitization process. The final content collection for the archiving process resulted in 54 hours of audio recordings. One video, which is 26 minutes long. As I mentioned, that was an edited video. It was mostly used by Anna Maria and Monica in the demonstration of the work they were doing in Nepal, mostly as a fundraising activity. They would show this video and share their experiences. I believe in that 54 hours of recordings, I can't remember what the 7 hours is there, but there are a variety of genres that I'll talk about. Apologies for not finishing that slide. There are 7 documents. They're mostly narratives and typed texts. Some of them are in Latin alphabet, some of them are in a modified Devanagari. Some of those narratives, as far as I can tell, are transcribed from the recordings on the tape, but some of the narratives that are in those documents aren't included in the recorded documentation. So it's extra exciting to have even a record of those, and almost 200 photographs as well, documenting their time in the Shuba community. There are around a dozen villages of Shuba speakers in the area that they live. And it's really nice that Monica Hoylig mostly worked in the same village that I spent a lot of time in. So that's been really amazing to see. Some of the highlights of this collection are just the genre breadth that was recorded. So we have recordings of songs, conversations, traditional stories, some of which I have subsequent recordings of from 40 years later. There are texts explaining kind of day-to-day practices, and particularly exciting for some current work that I'm doing on the use of tone in these languages, not just Shuba, but a variety of Tibetic languages. The recordings also include words and texts in elicitation frames. So that's been really exciting as well. From a kind of culture specifics perspective, this documentation are the only known recording and image of a Shuba speaker playing a tamyang, which is a stringed instrument. I've included the image here, and there's a lovely recording of this gentleman also playing that instrument. So that's been really exciting after many years of hearing people talk about how there used to be musical instruments in the village, to have that documentation. And perhaps from a less exciting perspective, the documentation in the images also includes a lot of images of snowfall at altitudes where there is no longer regular snowfall in Nepal. So a kind of sobering documentation of just how rapidly the climate is changing in these very fragile ecosystems. And an absolutely gorgeous photo there of a group of boys. One of them is now one of the senior members of his family. I spend a lot of time doing transcription work with. So it's been very nice to share these childhood photos with these people as well. Once I spent some time collecting the physical materials from Monica. She was living in Berlin. I was living in London at the time. So once the materials were digitized, the initial metadata was built, I returned digital copies to Monica, and have also started returning materials to Shuba community members and making people aware that these materials exist. Segmentation of some of the audio has begun, and as I said, I've started using some of the word lists for tone analysis, particularly getting a bit of intergenerational comparison, which normally requires, instead of having to wait 40 years so I can do it myself going forward, we can go back to these recordings, which has been very exciting to have. In terms of future planning, these recordings are going to be used as part of ongoing description of the Shuba language. As I said, once again, very grateful to have even this couple of generational time depth to be able to start working with, and looking forward to really pulling apart what's in those recordings when I get the chance to sit down with some speakers to transcribe these materials. But I will have the chance now that we have these materials digitized. The MH1 collection is part of a digital collection of Shuba and related languages, pretty much all of which is archived with PARADISEC. I'm very grateful, as I'm sure I will say in the actual session and many times throughout this conference, if I haven't already. I'm very grateful to PARADISEC for providing such a supportive and user-friendly archiving interface and opportunity, and that they are really encouraging of developing these collections of collections. So we have the Monica Hoylig collection, MH1, alongside two other digital collections of Shuba, including my own SUY1 collection, which is probably the largest. It's definitely the largest documentation collection I've recorded. There is a archive description paper available through LD&C for that collection. There's the MTC1 collection, which is from the Mother Tongue Centre Nepal. They're a NGO who work alongside SAL with the Shuba community currently, in further parallel to my own work. In 2016, 2014, they did a large, rapid, bold methodology collection of songs, stories, and conversations with over 50 participants. They trained Shuba speakers to do that recording and that digital and transcription work as part of the first step towards an orthography and a dictionary as well. So those materials they entrusted to me to archive, to ensure that they were available ongoingly, and then returning to those other languages on the map of Nepal. The LG1 collection is my work with Lamjung Yolmo, most of which was done between 2009 and 2013 as part of my dissertation work, but I still draw on those materials in ongoing work across this language family. I also worked with a colleague at SIL, thanks to Mary Cisco Kugdi, for giving me the opportunity to digitize Anna Marie Hari's Malamchi Valley Yolmo tapes. They had 8.5 hours of audio tapes from Anna Marie at SIL Nepal, which no one had the capacity to manage. So I took those tapes to PARADISEC. Thank you very much to Nick Teberger, who got those digitized so that I could build the metadata and archive them. And then finally, the LAN collection, which is of Lungtung, a language more closely related to the Malamchi Valley variety, where again, working with some SAL people to make sure those materials were archived once they'd been recorded. I'm running out of time. I don't think any of these lessons from developing these archives will be a surprise to anyone, but archiving is an exercise that requires expertise and trust, and some recognition of the amount of work and collaboration that goes into them. I'm sure these will have been recurring themes throughout this session. And I look forward to the opportunity to chat with you about anything that interested you in this. Otherwise, once again, thanks for being here, and my thanks to PARADISEC for having the opportunity for us all to come together and talk about these experiences.